Namaste, friends. First off, I just want to say thank you for being here, watching my video, supporting me along my journey. I really appreciate it, and I have so much gratitude for everyone who has been behind me along the way. Before we get started with the video, I do want to put out a trigger warning. I'm about to dive into some very heavy topics, and this is part of my story. I really want to be authentic and transparent with you guys, so I feel it's very important to share these things. And with that being said, viewer discretion is advised. If you are facing a crisis right now, please feel free to reach out to me or a loved one or some kind of help. I would also like for us to take a moment of silence before we begin for anyone who is struggling mentally, anybody who struggles with addiction, eating disorders, substance abuse disorders, alcoholism, you name it. I just would love for us to take a moment of silence. So let's all take a nice deep breath and just bow our heads for just a moment. All right, thanks for doing that with me. Today, I'm gonna be sharing my journey with alcoholism and recovery with you guys. So bear with me. As we all know, sometimes when we go back in time and share our journey or share our stories, we can have some emotions come to the surface, or we can go back kind of into that headspace. So I just ask that you all come with an open mind and an open heart, and just bear with me if I get choked up, because that will probably happen at some point in this video. With all that being said, here is my story. My journey in recovery began on September 24th, 2017. And I have been sober since. And that journey in recovery began after I had a binger for one of my best friend's birthdays. And I'll get into that here in a little bit. But my journey in recovery began by pulling an all-nighter, searching for rehabs, and I finally came across one, and it was called The Willows, and it was a rehab facility about 4 hours away from where I lived in Ohio. And I had been Google searching for wilderness rehabs because, as people that know me know, I'm a very big nature, outdoorsy kind of girl, and I was like, all right, if I'm gonna do this, I wanna go somewhere that's gonna be adventurous and I'm gonna have fun. Like, I can't sit inside a building all day, that's just not me. So I found this place called The Willows, and it's an adventure rehab is what it's called. So I was waiting till the sun came up, and at about 7 in the morning, I called, and right off the get-go, I mean, they were so supportive, had my best interest in mind, but they were like, I think this was on a Tuesday, and they were like, the soonest that we could get you into The Willows is on Friday. And I was like, oh, that's fine, like, that's perfect for me, you know, a few more days before I go to rehab. I didn't know then what I know now, but when you need to go to rehab, it's something they try to get you in very quickly because it's so easy to change your mind. So they were like, let us give you a call back. So I want to say it wasn't even 30 minutes later, they called me back and they were like, hey, so we have a sister rehab facility called the Treehouse, and we can get you in today. And I was like, they're like, but it's in Dallas, Texas. And I'm like, holy crap, like, all the way in Texas? Well, I need to like talk to my parents about this. I was just so unsure of it because I'm like, that is so far from here, you know? And so I made some phone calls. I got in contact with my mom and she was fully supportive. And then I got in contact with one of my best friends back home from Ohio about watching my dogs for me. And then I got back in touch with them and they were like, all right, your plane leaves at this time today. And called my mom back. She's like, have a bag packed. I'm coming to get you. And it just was crazy how quickly that all happened. And I am so grateful that it did. The treehouse was an amazing place, and I'll get into that here a little bit later in the video. But I just kind of wanted to give a little example of how my recovery journey began. But now I want to rewind and get into how my drinking started. I had my first drink when I was 16 years old. And I remember that being like one of the funnest nights of my life. I was with one of my best friends from back in Ohio and my boyfriend at the time. And we were at a Mexican restaurant and we had margaritas. That was my very first drinking experience. I mean, we had a ball. We were like on the tables dancing and I just felt so like free and so relieved and just like letting loose. And that's something that I've really struggled with my whole life. I remember being younger, like just always feeling like tension and just having trouble just like letting loose. Like I remember being really little, like having fun and letting loose, but especially in the teenage years, it really was hard. So I'm gonna go into my childhood a little bit and just how it was for me growing up, because I feel like all of that's very important and plays a role into how my alcoholism came to be. I did have a really good childhood. I'm not gonna sit and say that it was super shitty. Like we always had food on the table. I was literally spoiled by my parents. Like they pretty much did and got everything for me. And I have a lot of gratitude for them. They did the best they could raising me. So things that I talk about, I'm not putting blame on anybody. I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but I just want to kind of go into this just so that you guys get the full picture. But so yeah, my childhood was pretty good. I mean, I grew up in a really nice house with my mom and my dad, and we always had like a cat. But I remember from a very young age having feelings of emptiness and loneliness. And I don't remember exactly when those feelings started, but I was pretty young. And so I feel like trying to fill this void inside of me started very early on, because I remember I always wanted to be with my friends and I always like had to be doing something or hang out with someone. It was always really hard for me to just sit with myself, if that makes sense. So yeah, and then kind of going into my teenage years, more preteen years, I guess. I was overweight when I was younger, and I started getting bullied really bad by kids in school for being called fat and ugly and weird. And I was into like wearing like long basketball shorts, and people were really mean and would say that I looked like a boy all the time. But I remember like little me was always like, oh, well, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. You know, like I had that mentality in front of those people. And I was like friends with people who bullied me. Like, I don't know, something inside of me, I just always craved for people to like accept me and love me and just accept me for who I was. And it was really, really hard for me to accept people not liking me or people thinking I was weird or fat or whatever. That always really bothered me. And I mean, from like little, I'm talking like 10 years old, I was having this go on inside my head. At that age, I was so young, and I really didn't have like very good coping skills, I guess. So then fast forward into my early teenage years, I want to say about, well, I think the heaviest I was between 12 and 13, and then between 13 and 14 was when I first developed an eating disorder. And I struggled with anorexia. I felt like if I was skinny, then people would accept me and people would love me for who I was. So I remember like losing all this weight. I lost like 50 pounds, and any of you that went to school with me probably remember, because people didn't even recognize me. People like just were completely amazed. But I didn't do this the proper way. I starved myself, and I remember my mom having to take me to the doctor and have him tell me that I wasn't fat, and that was just my first addiction, basically, was, you know, like my addiction with my looks and my addiction with like trying to be skinny and starve myself. So that's when a lot of things really started for me. So I finally kind of overcame some of the anorexia, and I was still 14, and I got into my very first relationship. And it was a young high school relationship, and that was something that ended up becoming another addiction for me, because at that age I started completely depending on this person to validate me and make me accept myself. Like, so I put all of that in that person's hands without truly accepting myself for me. Like, I always wanted it to come from somewhere else, come from an external source. So this relationship, I wouldn't say it was a bad relationship, but it was definitely a young relationship. And this was the relationship I was in when I was 15, and my parents had divorced. And, you know, that was a really hard time for me. And I think that I stuffed a lot of these feelings that I had with that down, because I had very poor coping skills. I didn't know how to handle things. And, you know, I was in that relationship. So the relationship I was in, I was using to kind of numb myself in a way, you know, like I was so obsessed with my relationship that I was stuffing all these feelings with my parents' divorce down. And I will say that person was my rock during that time, and I really appreciated all the support and everything that person did for me. And you know, that was truly like really helped me get through that time. And then we get to when I was 16, and I had my first drinking experience, and little did I know that that first drinking experience was going to turn into what it became. Because when that happened, you know, I thought I was just having a fun night with my friends, and then I didn't realize what that one experience of drinking did to my brain. It was like, oh, we figured out how to flip the switch, you know, like here's your new coping skill for everything. So I remember instantly becoming obsessed with the idea of drinking. It was something I constantly wanted to do, and I unfortunately was very immature about it. I started becoming toxic, and I ended up ruining that relationship that I had, because all I wanted to do was go out and drink, and I just wasn't being mindful. I didn't really care about anything else, and I started screwing my relationships up with people. So that was kind of the tipping point for me when that person and I broke up. It completely shattered my world. I felt left with nothing. You know, this person that was here for me through my parents' divorce, like this person that for so many years was the one that, you know, was giving me my validation, helping me feel better about myself, was just gone out of my life, and I was stuck with me. And that's when I really began hating being stuck with myself. And I just didn't know how to handle emotions. So I turned to my new best friend, which was alcohol. Started with partying on the weekends, just going to fun high school parties and whatnot, to pulling all-nighters on school nights and just like fiending to find where I'm gonna get my next drink. Hanging out with people who weren't the best influences on me at that age because they were a lot older than me. They were able to buy me alcohol. And I didn't really have any issues. Like, I didn't really get in trouble. I remember there was one instance where my mom got called because the police came to a party because they smelled marijuana. And so that was like my first like kind of little get in trouble for partying thing, but I didn't really get punished too bad. And yeah, I ended up really screwing up with school because of my drinking. I remember I'd go into school and I'd still smell like alcohol and I'd be hungover, and altogether I think I missed 60 days my junior year. And then senior year came and I only made it halfway through the year before I unfortunately dropped out. And so yeah, high school really, like the last couple years, like as soon as I started the drinking, that's just all I really cared about. So after high school, I tried numerous programs to finally get my diploma, which unfortunately none of them worked out for me. But then I was about 17 at this point, and I got into a second relationship, and this relationship was very, very toxic. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but there was a lot of abuse in this relationship, and I kept staying in the relationship when I should have gotten out of it, just because the relationship itself was something to help fill that void inside of me. It was more validation, more reassurance about myself, and I just kept taking that from external sources. Like, at 17, I had no idea how to like love myself for who I was or accept myself for who I was. And then also 17 was when I first started getting put on all these different medications from my doctor. So I remember being 17, and that was when I first got put on Xanax, which that's a whole different story. We'll get into more of that a little later on, but I had been put on antidepressants, Xanax, and I was put on sleeping medications, and I was drinking on top of all of these medications. The doctor would warn me, like, don't drink on these, it's really bad for you. But I was 17, I really didn't give a shit. I was just like, I just want to numb myself, and that's all I knew how to do at that age. So when I finally got out of that relationship, I remember I had been single for a while, and I just really tried to take some me time and focus on things in my life. But that me time was more like party time. And, you know, getting a little bit older, alcohol started becoming more and more in my life, because I like was friends with older people, and I had a lot of friends starting to turn 21 and stuff. And so it just, partying and drinking just like steadily started increasing and increasing. And I remember, I think the first blackout that I ever had was when I was about 19. So as you can imagine, like from 16 to 19, I already started drinking to the point of blackouts. And I remember having those blackouts, and like the next day it being very, very scary for me, because I was just like, oh my gosh, like what happened to me? You know, it was really, really scary that I was letting something have that much control of me. And just looking back now, I don't know, it's really crazy to even think about like my body like walking around functioning but like not actually mentally being there, especially at that young. And then when I got into my early 20s is when my alcoholism really like escalated. I remember like I started really having bad blackouts, and that's when some drug use started becoming involved with my drinking. I basically look at it like the alcohol for me was liquid courage. So once I would drink to a certain point, then I felt risky to like try different things. And I never messed around with like heroin or anything like that, but I did try some other hallucinogenics, and I did some cocaine. And it was always like after I had drank a pretty decent amount where I got to the point where I was like wanting to do that. And I wouldn't say I necessarily had like an issue with other drugs like that. Like my main thing was alcohol. Like nothing else gave me what alcohol gave me. And in my early 20s, I started having issues with work. I would call out hungover all the time or just not show up to work, and I was just really struggling. I started like having like these god awful hangovers from hell, and I was just remember like feeling so sick all the time, and I would get sick all the time, and just like my immune system was not serving me, and it started really like spiraling out of control. And I'm saying this is probably about like 21 to 22. And yeah, I mean, it started getting to the point where it just wasn't even like that fun for me anymore. Like I just like felt horrible all the time. Drinking had gotten so bad by the time that I was 21 that within 3 months after turning 21, I got my first DUI. And it wasn't just getting pulled over. Like I don't know if I blacked out or if I fell asleep, but I swerved across the road and I totaled my car into 2 parked cars right in front of my bedroom window. And that was when friends and family started really getting concerned about me, just because it wasn't like just a regular DUI. Like I was more than double the limit and I had totaled my car. So that was really a traumatic thing to go through. And I felt a lot of shame and guilt from that. But that was when things really started to hit the fan. And during that time, I had been in some relationships that were not healthy for me. They were pretty toxic. Both of them involved a lot of alcohol. So I don't even think that me and the person really had love for each other. I feel like our love was a mutual love for alcohol. And that's really all the relationships were based around. And so I think I definitely endured some trauma from going through those relationships. And in the meantime, I had like seriously messed up a lot of relationships that I had with people that were close to me and very important to me. And I want to say it was when I was 23, that's when things got really, really dark. I had been working for a bar and I was bartending until like 4 a.m. And I remember we would like stay after work and drink, and then I'd go home and drink some more, and I just like got into these horrible spirals with alcohol. Like I just like don't even know how it got to the point of consuming me like it did. But then I ended up getting kind of a big girl job. I ended up working as a leasing consultant. And when I got that job, I remember I was just like crying. I was so grateful. Like finally I was gonna get out of the bar scene and, you know, work a big girl job. And I just felt like it was divine intervention at that point, and I was just so excited. And so I started the job, and I remember like when I started it, I was having some issues like after the first couple months being on time and just like being hungover at work. And so that was the first time I decided like, all right, I'm gonna try and get sober. And I remember I took like maybe a week off drinking the first time, and then I ended up drinking again. And after that week off, it was like even worse than before I'd taken the break. And then I remember kind of my boss, she gave me an ultimatum. And so she was like, if you don't, you know, fix what you're doing, like you're gonna be fired. And so I ended up taking a whole month off drinking completely by myself. I didn't do any AA meetings or anything like that. I took a whole entire month off. And then just after that month, I was just like, all right, well, I did it for a month. Like, you know, I can probably drink and handle my shit now. I was so wrong. So after taking that month off of drinking, and then I started drinking again. And at this point, my drinking was like the worst that it had been. And yeah, this is hard for me to talk about. But I was right before I turned 24. I was sexually assaulted. That was just an awful time for me. And like I said, my only coping skill was drinking. So after that happened to me, it fucking went downhill. Like, I'm not even gonna lie, it went downhill. Sorry for my language, but it literally, it got so bad. And I ended up really, really screwing up with my big girl job, and I got fired. The manager actually like came to my apartment and was like banging on my door, and when I opened it, she was like yelling at me, and it was just really hard because like I wanted to do good. I've always had in my heart that like I want to do good. I want to be a good person. I want to be liked by people. I want to be successful, like all of these things. And I just like was like the opposite of that. And it was just a really, really hard pill for me to swallow, getting fired. And so I remember like the week after getting fired, I don't know how I'm like still even alive, because I remember that week I just drank and drank, and like that's all I did. And I remember, this is awful, but I remember going and getting like lunch with my dad, and I was just sitting there like I just felt horrible. Like I didn't even feel like me. Like I felt like I was like slowly like leaving my body. I felt like I was dying. And that was right before I went to Electric Forest. And so I went to Electric Forest, and I drank the first day I was there, and the next day I literally thought I was dying. Like, oh my God, I was like the worst I've ever felt in my life. And I didn't really know at the time what was going on with me, but I was suffering from alcohol withdrawal. And I remember like I stayed sober the next couple days at Electric Forest, and I just remember like crying so much and just walking around the forest and just like really having like this reflection of myself, and just being able to like step back and see who I really was. And I'm just like, this is not the life I want to live. Like, I don't want to drink like this anymore. And it was just such an awakening. But then I ended up having to leave Forest early, because like now I know that the alcohol withdrawals were so bad. I legit thought I was dying, and I had to tell my friend on the way home. I was like begging, like, I need to go to the hospital. And I didn't end up going to the hospital. I got some sleep, but I felt so bad. It was like the worst I felt in my life. I was having like this insane paranoia. Like I thought there were like, this is so crazy, but like it was to the point I thought like I had really like weird worms and shit living inside of my gut. Like I was just like completely fucked in the head. Well, when I got back from Electric Forest, I decided like I'm done. I'm not drinking anymore. And I made it a week. And I tried so hard, but I couldn't do it on my own. I made it a week, and then I started drinking again, and the drinking got even worse. The withdrawals were so bad. Like I was shaking every night. I'd wake up and I'd be shaking, and I just remember like wanting to die, and I had been really suicidal, and there were numerous times like I just thought it was the end, and oh God, it was awful. Just bringing up a lot of feelings of like anxiety for me. It's just weird like talking about this and kind of feeling this anxiety like come back up to the surface. So at this point, I was having withdrawals from the alcohol. So I would take benzos during the day, and then I'd drink at night and wake up and just, it was insanity. Like when they say that alcoholism has insanity, like, I mean, they're not kidding. Like it's fucking insanity. And I just like kept thinking like, what is wrong with me? Why can't I quit drinking? Why can't I do this? And so then I got to a point where I was just so fed up with it. And I ended up having some friends who were good influences on me. One of my friends, I went to a couple music festivals with him, and he was straight edge, and he just would like tell me, you know, like, you don't need that shit. Like, you don't need to drink. Like, everything needs to come from within, you know, like external things aren't gonna help you. And I was just like, whoa, this was like a mind-blowing thing. Like something so small that he was telling me then, I mean, it's just had a huge impact on me since. I remember like really meditating on all the things that he had said to me, and just thinking like, he's right. Like, I don't need these pills. I don't need this alcohol. Like, I don't need weed. I don't need this or that. Like, you know, there has to be a way. Like, he can do it. Why can't I? You know, there has to be a way to like free myself of all these chains that I've strapped onto. During that time period, I tried, and I just could not do it on my own. And then we get to my friend's birthday, and that was my last binger, I like to say, because I got so blacked out to a point, like I scared my friends. They were just like, I mean, thank God I was with people that night who cared about me so much, because I was literally trying to drive blacked out, and I hate fucking admitting that. It's like terrible. It's because I'm just so against drunk driving now, and it's just, it's just such a bad thing. And I hate that that is who I was, but I was really, really sick. And thank goodness that they had my best interest in mind, and that they loved me enough to be like, no, like, we're gonna fight you on this. Thank God, like, because I swear, like, if I would have driven that night, I probably would have died. So I seriously, like, my friends that were there for me that night, like, you guys are my angels. I seriously will always, always be so grateful for saving me that night. That's where we get back to the pulling the all-nighter and looking into rehabs. And my last night drinking is something that I reflect back on a lot, because that's what helps keep me sober, is thinking back at the person I was, thinking back at that last night, getting my last binger out of the way. Like, I'm just so grateful to be here, because I don't know how I got that lucky, but that's what's really made me believe that I'm here for a greater purpose. Because now with being in recovery, I have met a lot of people who are unfortunately no longer with us. And, you know, all the time I just think like, why? Why was I saved, but they weren't? And, you know, I really just have to believe that it's because I was put here for a greater purpose and to share my story and to help people. And at the end of the day, if I only help one person, then that's totally worth it to me. And it's really hard to come out and be vulnerable like this, but I feel like it is essential because, I mean, I know there's so many people struggling right now, and it's really hard for me. I just wish that I could give what I have to people struggling. Like, I wish I could give you the answers. I wish that I could like just show you like what it takes. I wish I could help you. So, I don't know. I'm just so grateful that I've made it this far and that I've been able to come out on the other side and be able to make this video for you guys and share my story with you. I would say if there's any advice that I could give, it's definitely one day at a time. I mean, I know that sounds cliche, but it is so true. One day at a time. Like, if I only worry about not drinking today, that's all I have to worry about. I don't have to worry about tomorrow or the next day or the day after that. My focus is on today. And as long as I don't go pick up a bottle today, that's what matters. So that is my biggest piece of advice. And I'll tell you the second thing that I feel is super important is you've got to want it for yourself. Like, it's so easy to want to do it for this person or that person or have people pushing you to do it for them, but that's ultimately, you have to do it for yourself. You have to want it bad enough for yourself. You have to dig in there and you've got to find your purpose. And you have to want to be sober more than you wanted that drink. And that's just how it is. Like, you can't force anybody to be sober. You can't make anybody want it. Like, you have to want this for yourself. That is how it's going to work. How you're going to be able to come out on the other side and be like, I wanted this so badly for myself. Like, my recovery was my number one value, my number one priority in my life. And if you put that first and you want it bad enough, like, you can make it happen. I am living, breathing proof that you can make it work. And I definitely think that AA is something, or even NA, one of those programs, I feel like that is great. It's a great start. It's not something that I personally do anymore, but for the first year of my recovery, that was my support that really helped me. And now I'm just at a point where I work my program and I have my support system. I have people in my life that help me, that mentor me, that guide me. And I've been working with a therapist one-on-one for, oh my gosh, it's gonna be 2 years already now. And she's been amazing. So I'm totally like pro therapy. I feel like if you can find a good therapist, that is just golden. But once I made it through my rehab program at the Treehouse, that is when I ended up moving to Asheville, North Carolina. And I lived in a halfway house here for about 5 to 6 months after my rehab program, and I also did an IOP program here. And just you know, taking those steps, really doing it and giving myself as much support as I could, that was essential. Because I'm gonna tell you, like, your first 90 days, first 6 months, I mean, that is when it is so important to have a good support system and, you know, have a sponsor if you're doing AA. So I really think that that's something that is very essential and very key to your recovery being successful. But fast forward to today, the main things is finding new coping skills, because that's what drinking or using a substance, I mean, for me, like, drinking was my coping skill. It was numbing. That's what I knew how to do. And now I've adopted some new coping skills into my life. I am really big into yoga and meditation, and then like therapy, like I said. So those things are what helped get me through today, and just really have like helped me to become the person that I am today. Probably some things that I forgot to mention, but if anybody has any questions, want to hear any details on any of the things that I talked about, please do not hesitate to reach out and ask me. I'd love to be here and talk with you about them. And I just want to say thank you so much for everybody tuning in and watching this video. It's really hard to share my story on here. It's a very vulnerable thing for me to do, but I've decided that, you know, the things that scare you the most, that's the things that I want to do. So I want to put myself out here because I want to be able to help people and show them that there is another way of life. So please feel free to message me. Also, like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, if you are in a crisis right now, please feel free to reach out to me or a loved one or some type of support. We are here for you. You are not alone. And I just really want the best for everybody, and I just want to help people heal. So please don't ever hesitate to reach out to me. I have so much gratitude in my heart for you all. Thank you so much for tuning in. Namaste.